So I want you to just imagine the global landscape just a few short years ago, right in the teeth of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, yeah. A really dark time.
Exactly. We are talking about a period of visceral, almost incomprehensible economic terror for most of the planet.
Hmm.
I mean, small businesses were just boarding up their windows.
Oh, absolutely. Millions of people losing their livelihoods basically overnight.
Yeah, and the sheer panic of figuring out how to, like, buy groceries or pay rent was this daily grinding reality for so many.
It was terrifying.
But, and this is the crazy part, if you looked at the financial data from that exact same period, you saw this massive record-breaking surge in billionaire wealth.
Right. The contrast wasn't just stark. It felt, I don't know, it felt broken.
Yes, it felt like a structural error, like a literal glitch in the way human society operates. You had essential workers risking their lives for minimum wage, while the absolute peak of the wealth pyramid added trillions to their net worth.
And they did it without even leaving their estates.
That's exactly. So welcome to today's Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are getting into something really fascinating.
I'm very excited for this one. I'm a resident expert on economic frameworks, and this topic is just incredibly relevant.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because to a lot of people living through that pandemic wealth surge, it felt unprecedented.
It did. When you see that level of devastating loss for the many happening at the exact same moment as unprecedented accumulation for the few, it creates this profound sense of, like, societal vertigo.
Societal vertigo. I like that phrase.
Thanks. But the thing is, when we look back through historical economic data, we realize we aren't looking at a glitch at all.
We're not.
No, not at all. We are looking at structural mechanics that have existed for centuries. They are just functioning in a modern digital environment now.
Which perfectly sets up the mission of our deep dive today. We are essentially taking the economic blueprints drawn up by a philosopher who fought against one of the most entrenched, ancient systems of inequality on Earth.
Over 80 years ago, no less?
Right. And we were laying those historical blueprints over our modern economy to see where the pipes are leaking.
We're talking about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, specifically his framework of what he called state socialism.
Now, real quick, an impartiality disclaimer for you listening. Today, we aren't taking political sides. We're not endorsing a specific ideology, whether it's left-wing or right-wing.
Right. We are just neutrally exploring the source material.
Exactly. We are simply taking Ambedkar's historical diagnostic tools, which he used to dissect caste-based economic exclusion, and we're applying them to modern problems.
Things like extreme global wealth concentration, the daily realities of the gig economy, and the housing crisis.
So, Ambedkar, he is a fascinating figure to use as a lens for this, right?
Oh, incredibly fascinating. I mean, he is widely known as the chief architect of the Indian Constitution
Right.
and a relentless crusader against the caste system. But his background was actually deeply rooted in economics.
Really? I feel like a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. He studied at Columbia University under thinkers like John Dewey, so he absorbed a lot of American pragmatism. And then he went on to the London School of Economics.
So he wasn't just coming at this from a purely moral standpoint.
Exactly. He didn't just view inequality as a moral failing or like a religious superstition. He viewed it as a highly sophisticated, rigorously enforced economic architecture.
Wow. Okay.
And his memos from the 1940s, where he outlines the state socialism concept, they're essentially a masterclass.
A masterclass in what?
In identifying exactly how systems are designed to funnel wealth upward, all while keeping the laboring class perpetually insecure.
So let's start right at the bedrock of his worldview. Because honestly, it directly challenges the standard civics class narrative that, most of us grew up with.
It really does. We are basically taught that the ultimate pinnacle of human freedom is political democracy, right?
Right. The right to vote, free speech, having a parliament or a Congress.
Exactly. But Ambedkar argued something incredibly provocative. He said that political democracy is entirely hollow, almost meaningless, actually, if it isn't paired with economic democracy.
Wait, meaningless. That's a strong word.
It is. But he recognized this really dangerous human tendency to celebrate legal liberty while completely ignoring material reality.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, think about it. You can draft the most poetic, beautiful constitution in human history.
Sure.
You can guarantee every single adult citizen the right to step into a voting booth and cast a ballot. But if a massive portion of that voting population is landless or starving and entirely dependent on a wealthy elite just to survive the week, what power does that vote actually hold?
Oh, I see. because you're just voting for survival at that point.
Exactly. Ambedkar's central insight was that economic power is, by its very nature, coercive power.
Coercive, right.
If an entity, whether that's an ancient landlord or, say, a modern massive corporation, if they control your access to food, shelter, and healthcare, they inherently dictate your political voice.
Because if you speak out, you lose your house or your job.
Right. The law on paper basically becomes irrelevant in the face of starvation.
It's like, okay, think about it like being handed a menu at an incredibly opulent five-star restaurant.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Right. So you sit down, the waiter hands you this beautiful leather-bound book, and you have the theoretical freedom to choose absolutely anything you want.
The lobster, the caviar.
Exactly. You could point to the lobster. No one is legally barring you from ordering it.
Right.
But if you have absolutely no money in your pocket, that freedom is an illusion.
You're just smelling the food while you starve.
Yeah. You have the quote-unquote opportunity to eat, but your actual condition prevents it.
And that restaurant menu is the perfect visualization of the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of condition.
Which is a huge debate in economics.
It is. Modern, unbridled capitalism leans entirely on equality of opportunity.
Right. The whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea.
Exactly. The prevailing argument is that as long as we remove the legal barriers, as long as the starting line of the race is legally the same for everyone, then the system is fair.
Run the race, and whoever wins, wins.
But Ambedkar looked at that and pointed out the absurdity of the premise. Because what if one runner has been starved for a month and is carrying a 50-pound weight?
Right.
And the other runner has been training at high altitude with a team of dietitians and a massive inheritance. Putting them on the same starting line isn't justice.
It's just a performance.
Exactly. The outcome of the race is practically dictated by the conditions of the runners before the starting gun even fires.
So he was highly critical of unbridled capitalism.
Oh, absolutely.
But the sources also make a point of showing that he didn't just critique capitalism. He was looking for a solution in the 1930s and 40s.
Right, which was a time when the global intellectual community was heavily debating Marxist revolution.
And Ambedkar explicitly rejected orthodox Marxism.
He did, which is a really crucial piece of the puzzle.
Why did he push back against the Soviet model? Because ostensibly, that model was claiming to solve this exact problem of economic inequality.
Because Ambedkar refused to accept the brutal trade-offs that orthodox Marxism demanded.
The trade-offs, you mean the authoritarianism.
Exactly. When we talk about orthodox Marxism in the context of the 1930s, we are primarily talking about the Soviet implementation.
Right.
The belief that the working class must seize the means of production through a violent rupture, culminating in a dictatorship of the proletariat.
And the Marxist argument was that to break the absolute power of capital, you had to temporarily suspend democratic institutions, right?
Centralize all power in the state and use authoritarian force to restructure society.
The old idea that you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet?
Exactly.
But in this case, the eggs were free speech, a free press, and the right to dissent.
Which is exactly the kind of logic Ambedkar abhorred. He valued human liberty deeply.
He wasn't willing to sacrifice democracy for economics?
Not at all. He saw that the dictatorship of the proletariat historically just resulted in a permanent dictatorship.
You just swap out who is oppressing you?
Right. You eliminate the capitalist ruling class, only to replace them with a bureaucratic ruling class that has absolute power over your life.
So if the state owns all the food, all the housing, and all the jobs,
and you cannot vote the state leadership out of office or criticize them in the press without being sent to a gulag, you haven't achieved freedom. You've just changed the management of your subjugation.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So he was looking for a middle path.
He was. He wanted the material security and the structural fairness promised by socialist economics, but he absolutely refused to surrender the parliamentary democratic system.
He wanted the economic power of socialism tethered to the accountability of democracy.
Which is how he arrived at his framework of state socialism. He believed that key industries and fundamental economic protections needed to be managed by the state for the public good. But, and this is the absolute genius of his proposal, he insisted that this economic structure must be written directly into the Constitution itself.
Wait, really? Why the Constitution?
Well, think about the alternative.
Why not just vote on it like any other law? Like, if you have a parliament, why not just pass a bill to protect workers or nationalize an industry?
Because standard legislation is incredibly fragile.
Fragile how?
If you leave the fundamental economic structure of a society up to the whims of whichever political party happens to win an election in a given decade, you invite regulatory capture.
Oh, because the rich will just buy the politicians.
Exactly. Those with concentrated wealth will simply use that wealth to lobby, influence the media, fund campaigns, and ultimately buy the political process.
And then they just systematically dismantle any laws that threaten their capital accumulation.
You hit the nail on the head. Ambedkar knew that if economic democracy wasn't enshrined as an untouchable constitutional right, literally on the exact same legal footing as the right to free speech or the right to a fair trial, it would eventually be eroded.
Eroded by the gravitational pull of concentrated wealth.
Yes.
Which brings us back to the reality that if you are struggling just to survive economically, your political voice is easily marginalized.
It is.
If you, as a citizen are working 3-gig economy jobs just to keep a roof over your head, you do not have the time to organize a union.
Or to protest or run for local office.
Right. Your entire cognitive bandwidth is consumed by the panic of survival.
While the extremely wealthy possess the ultimate political luxury,
Which is time.
time, they have the resources to hire massive think tanks to draft highly technical legislation that benefits them.
They can hire armies of lawyers to litigate against environmental regulation.
Or labor regulations, yeah. They can fund super PACs to shape the entire narrative of an election cycle.
So when economic inequality reaches an extreme level, it fundamentally warps the democratic process.
It does. It mutates from a system of one person, one vote into a system where capital naturally dictates policy.
Okay, so if Ambedkar established that economic conditions dictate true freedom, we have to look at the specific historical conditions he was fighting against in pre-independence India.
We do, because the analyses in our sources don't just view the caste system as a historical tragedy.
Right. They view it as a mechanical blueprint for economic exclusion.
And the parallels they draw between the caste system and modern wealth barriers are just staggering.
So let's talk about that. To understand this, we have to reframe how we think about caste, don't we?
Yeah, because in the West, it is frequently taught purely as a sociological phenomenon, or like a religious system of ritual purity.
Which it was, obviously. The social stigma and untouchability were horrific realities.
Absolutely. But Ambedkar, the economist, analyzed caste as an incredibly sophisticated, highly formalized economic structure.
An ancient, airtight division of labor.
Yes. But more sinisterly, as he famously pointed out, it wasn't just a division of labor. It was a division of laborers.
The division of laborers, meaning
Right.
it wasn't just about what job you did. It was about segregating the human beings doing the jobs into isolated, non-competing silos.
Exactly. It meant your occupation, your access to resources, and your economic mobility were violently and legally dictated by your birth.
So if you were born into an untouchable community,
You were systematically denied the right to own land.
and in an agrarian economy, land is everything.
It's the sole engine of wealth creation. By denying land ownership, the system guaranteed you could never accumulate capital.
Wow.
Furthermore, you were denied access to credit, and you were forbidden from acquiring education or carrying weapons.
You were legally and socially forced to perform specific, often degrading, uncompensated labor for the upper castes. It's basically a multi-generational lockout from the economy.
That's a great way to put it.
The system is explicitly designed to ensure that wealth and property remain permanently concentrated at the top.
While a massive underclass is kept in perpetual economic subjugation to serve them, you are born into a condition that you literally cannot work your way out of.
And this is where the thematic transition to modern times becomes so potent for our deep dive.
Because if we look at modern global wealth barriers, we see systems that, well, they aren't formalized in ancient religious texts,
Right.
but they are just as ruthlessly effective at keeping wealth concentrated and locking certain demographics out of capital ownership.
I know a lot of people hearing this will instinctively bristle,
Oh, I'm sure.
because the prevailing narrative of the modern global economy is the myth of the pure meritocracy.
The idea that we left the feudal lords and the caste systems in the past.
Right. We tell ourselves, if someone builds a massive tech empire today and becomes a billionaire, isn't that just the result of extreme hard work?
Long hours, brilliant innovation.
Yeah. We love the story of the founder in the garage. Caste was determined by blood at birth. But modern capitalism is supposed to be determined by merit.
It is the most powerful and comforting narrative of our time.
What?
But just as Ambedkar deconstructed the justifications for caste, modern economists deconstruct the meritocracy myth.
It isn't that hard work doesn't exist, right?
Exactly. Or that a brilliant innovation shouldn't be rewarded. But the meritocracy narrative completely ignores the staggeringly unequal starting lines.
Okay, let's look closely at that tech founder in the garage.
Right. The first question we have to ask is, who owns the garage?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Did that founder inherit a debt-free education because their parents paid for Stanford?
Right.
Did they have family wealth that allowed them to live rent-free in that garage for 3 years while they experimented with failing startups?
Because most startups fail.
They do.
Yeah.
Did they have access through elite university networks or family connections to early-stage venture capital?
Did they have an absolute concrete economic safety net that guaranteed they could fail 5 times without ever facing the threat of homelessness?
Exactly. They have the luxury of taking massive world-changing risks because their floor is made of solid concrete.
Whereas a brilliant kid born into deep poverty is walking a tightrope over a canyon.
Yes. If they take a risk and fail, they don't just pivot to a new startup. They end up on the street.
So inherited wealth and generational structural advantages basically operate as modern birthrights.
They really do. In many modern economies, the single greatest statistical predictor of a person's financial success is the wealth of the parents they were born to.
That's a wild statistic.
It's sobering. If an entire demographic of people has been historically excluded from homeownership, say, through government-sanctioned redlining in the 20th century,
Or discriminatory lending practices.
or purely because their ancestors were denied the ability to accumulate capital, they cannot pass down generational wealth.
They don't have the house to pass down.
Right.
They don't have the equity to borrow against to start a small business or pay for college.
And without that collateral, they are structurally locked out of the credit systems that build modern wealth.
The outcome mimics the economic function of caste.
Precisely. Capital remains concentrated among those who already possess it, and the labor class remains perpetually insecure, forced to sell their labor just to survive, regardless of how hard they work.
So to see how these modern structural barriers are operating and accelerating in real time today, we have to look at the engines driving this wealth to the top 1%.
We are moving from the historical concept of agrarian land ownership to the modern concept of digital infrastructure.
We're talking about tech monopolies and platform capitalism.
Yes, we are living through a historic, almost feudal concentration of capital right now.
We frequently hear the statistics about the top 1% owning more wealth than the entire global middle class combined.
But what is vital to understand from our sources is how that wealth is being continuously generated and accelerated.
And the driving force today is the architecture of platform capitalism.
Specifically within what we call the gig economy.
Right. Rideshare apps, food delivery platforms, freelance labor marketplaces.
It is common in these analyses to hear gig economy platforms described as new feudal structures.
Which sounds incredibly dramatic. I mean, feudalism brings up images of medieval kings, lords in castles, and peasants toiling in the mud.
It does.
So how does a sleek, convenient app on my smartphone equate to a medieval feudal lord?
It all comes down to analyzing the relationship between the worker, the tools of production, and the assumption of risk.
Okay, unpack that.
In a traditional capitalist employment model, which, can certainly be flawed and exploitative, the employer at least assumes a portion of the physical and financial risk.
Right. The employer buys the factory building.
They purchase and maintain the heavy machinery. They are legally obligated to guarantee a minimum wage, pay overtime.
Maybe provide health insurance or workers' compensation if someone is injured on the job.
Exactly. They own the capital, so they take on the risk of maintaining that capital.
But in the gig economy.
In the gig economy, the tech platform has achieved something genuinely unprecedented. They have successfully outsourced almost 100% of the physical risk and the capital depreciation to the worker.
While retaining algorithmic control over the profits?
Yes. Let's trace the mechanics of this with a rideshare driver.
Okay, so a driver for one of these massive apps is essentially a digital peasant.
Structurally, yeah.
Because in the historical feudal era, a peasant did not own the land they farmed. They worked the lord's land, and they were forced to surrender a massive percentage of their crop to the lord just for the quote-unquote privilege of surviving on that land.
And today, the gig worker doesn't own the land, which in this case is the digital infrastructure.
The algorithm, the app that connects them to the customer.
Right. They're merely renting access to it from a digital feudal lord.
And look at how the risk is distributed. The driver has to buy the car.
They pay for the gas.
The insurance, the constant maintenance.
And the physical asset, the car, is rapidly depreciating in value with every single mile driven.
So the driver absorbs all of that financial decay.
Meanwhile, the platform controls the pricing algorithm. They use dynamic pricing to charge the customer the maximum possible amount based on real-time demand,
While simultaneously using hidden metrics to offer the driver the minimum possible amount they are mathematically likely to accept.
the algorithm is constantly calculating how to squeeze both ends to maximize the platform's extraction.
And because the platform classifies the driver as an independent contractor, they are entirely stripped of the labor rights that took a century of strikes and blood to win.
No overtime pay, no guaranteed minimum wage for the hours spent idling and waiting for a ride.
No collective bargaining.
If the driver gets into an accident, the platform owes them absolutely nothing for their medical bills.
Furthermore, the platform can deactivate a worker, essentially banishing them from the digital land with zero due process.
Based purely on a dip in their algorithmic rating.
Which brings us back to why Ambedkar argued that simply tweaking the edges of an exploitative system doesn't work.
Right. A common modern policy proposal is, well, we will just tax the tech billionaires a little more at the end of the year and redistribute some of that cash to the working class.
But Ambedkar's framework suggests that redistribution is fundamentally inadequate when the extraction is continuous.
Exactly. You cannot simply redistribute wealth if the very structural architecture of the platform is designed to drain wealth from the worker to the monopoly every single second of every single day.
It's basically like trying to empty a swimming pool with a teacup while a fire hose is blasting into it.
That is a perfect analogy. If the system is inherently exploitative by design, taxation just slightly slows the rate of bleeding.
The tech monopoly isn't just a regular business. It has become essential public infrastructure for labor.
And when a handful of unaccountable corporations control the digital infrastructure of modern work, they wield unchecked coercive power over the working class.
The extreme wealth inequality isn't a glitch in the code of the gig economy.
No, it is the entire purpose of the code.
So this structural exploitation isn't just confined to gig apps. The mechanics of upward wealth extraction infect our most basic human needs,
Leading to the massive interconnected crises we see today.
particularly the housing crisis and the explosion of personal debt.
This is where abstract economic theory crashes directly into the agonizing daily reality of millions of people. We have to examine how essential human needs, like shelter, healthcare, education, have been systematically transformed into speculative financial assets for the global elite.
If you are structurally excluded from capital, like we talked about, if you don't have that generational wealth or a trust fund, you are backed into a corner.
You still require a physical place to live. You need shelter.
But because housing has become a playground for massive corporate investment firms and speculative buyers, the cost of a basic home has completely detached from local wages.
Entirely detached.
The median income in a city can no longer mathematically afford the median home price in that same city.
So people are forced into massive debt traps just to secure a roof over their heads.
The sources call this the financialization of survival.
Yes. Historically, a home was primarily viewed as a place to live, a shelter. Today, residential real estate is a highly lucrative, global, speculative commodity.
Following the 2008 financial crisis, massive private equity firms realized that millions of foreclosed single-family homes were distressed assets.
So they swept in with billions in institutional capital, buying up entire neighborhoods in cash.
They outbid regular families who needed mortgages, bundled these homes into rental-backed securities, and fundamentally shifted vast swaths of the housing market from ownership to permanent tenancy.
They constrained the supply of available homes to buy, which forces more people into the rental market.
And because the rental market is increasingly cornered by these massive corporate entities utilizing algorithmic pricing software,
They can raise rents across entire cities simultaneously.
the renter is now trapped. They are spending 40, 50, sometimes 60% of their take-home pay just to avoid homelessness.
They are working their algorithmic gig economy job, surrendering a huge cut of their labor value to a tech platform.
And then taking the remainder of their exhausted paycheck and handing it directly to a corporate landlord.
It is a dual funnel of continuous wealth extraction moving relentlessly upward.
So let's apply Ambedkar's critique of pure redistribution to this housing nightmare. Because a very popular political solution right now is to offer subsidies.
Right.
Let's say the government realizes rent is too high, so they decide to give every struggling renter a $500 a month cash subsidy to help pay for housing.
Okay.
If a basic need like housing is rigged like a casino where the house always wins, how does that $500 actually play out in reality?
Well, if you do not change the underlying structure of the market, that $500 cash handout will bypass the renter entirely and end up straight in the landlord's pocket.
Really?
It's an inflationary trap.
Yeah.
If you inject cash into the bottom of an enclosed system where a monopoly controls a life-sustaining resource, the monopoly simply captures the cash.
Oh, I see.
The corporate landlord knows you have an extra $500, and because you cannot choose to simply not have shelter, they will just raise the rent by $500.
You are no better off, but the state has just transferred public funds directly to a private equity firm.
Exactly.
The casino just raises the minimum bet at the table.
Yeah. That is exactly what happens. This is why Ambedkar argued that structural intervention is the only legitimate path to break the cycle of exploitation.
You cannot fix a rigged game by handing the players more chips. You have to change the rules of the game.
Precisely.
So what does that structural intervention look like for housing?
It requires decommodifying housing to a significant degree.
Decommodifying.
Yes. It challenges the meritocracy myth again. There is no inherent merit in a private equity firm using an algorithm to buy up a neighborhood and price out the families who have lived and worked there for generations.
Right.
Ambedkar's logic dictates that the state has a moral and economic duty to intervene aggressively. This means massive investments in publicly owned social housing to dramatically increase supply outside the private market.
Okay.
It means strict, localized rent controls or heavy taxation penalties on speculative vacant investment properties. You have to actively remove the profit motive from the basic requirement of human survival.
Which perfectly sets up the solution phase of our discussion. We have diagnosed the illness, we've traced the historical mechanisms of caste exclusion, mapped them onto algorithmic gig work, and examined the financialization of the housing market.
But Ambedkar didn't just diagnose. He provided a highly actionable framework for a cure.
And the central pillar of his solution is the concept of universal basic services.
Universal Basic Services, or UBS. This is arguably the most powerful concept to emerge from this framework.
Let's break it down.
It is the proposition that fundamental, life-sustaining services must be provided to every citizen universally, free at the point of use.
As the absolute baseline foundation for any functional economic and political participation.
Exactly. We're talking about the essentials. Healthcare, education, clean water, energy, public transit.
And in a modern context, internet access and digital data have absolutely joined that list of survival necessities.
Ambedkar envisioned a society where the state takes on the non-negotiable responsibility of ensuring that no citizen can ever fall below a baseline of dignified survival.
Regardless of their employment status.
Yes, and we must differentiate universal basic services from a concept that gets a lot of airtime in Silicon Valley today.
You mean universal to basic income, or UBI.
Yes.
UBI is the idea of just giving every citizen a set amount of cash every month, say $1,000, and letting them fend for themselves in the free market.
Right.
Why does Ambedkar's logic suggest that UBS is structurally superior to handing out cash?
It returns entirely to the inflation capture mechanism we just discussed with the rent subsidy.
Okay.
If you give everyone $1,000 a month, but healthcare, housing, and energy are still entirely controlled by unbridled, speculative, profit-driven capitalism.
That UBI will simply be eaten by inflation in those specific inelastic sectors.
Exactly. If a pharmaceutical conglomerate holds a monopoly patent on life-saving insulin, and they know the entire population just got a guaranteed extra $1,000 a month,
The price of insulin will miraculously rise.
Universal Basic Services takes a completely different route. It removes those essential survival needs from the speculative market entirely.
It's the difference between throwing someone a cash life preserver every time the river floods versus pouring a massive, indestructible concrete foundation so their house doesn't wash away in the first place.
That's a great image. You are guaranteeing that a cancer diagnosis won't result in personal bankruptcy.
You are ensuring that a family won't freeze in the winter because they couldn't pay a privatized energy bill.
You are providing a stable floor that people can actually build a life on top of.
Have we ever done this before?
Look at historical precedents. There was a time when fire departments were privatized.
Wait, really? Private fire departments?
Yes. In early cities, private fire brigades would only put out fires for houses that paid a subscription fee.
Oh, wow.
If you didn't have the plaque on your house, they would literally stand there and watch your house burn to the ground.
That is insane.
And sometimes the fire would spread and burn down the whole block. So society eventually realized that fire protection is an essential public good that cannot be subject to a profit motive.
We decommodified it.
We decommodified it. Universal Basic Services argues that healthcare and housing are the modern equivalents of the fire department.
And when you provide that concrete foundation, it fundamentally alters the power dynamic of labor,
It creates what Ambedkar called equality of condition.
which we talked about earlier.
Right. When your basic survival, your health, your shelter, your children's education, is guaranteed by the state as a right of citizenship, your relationship to your employer changes overnight.
You are no longer forced to accept an abusive, underpaid gig economy job just to afford groceries or basic medical care.
You gain the most dangerous power a worker can possess, the power to say no.
Because starvation is no longer the alternative to compliance.
Precisely. And when the working class collectively gains the power to refuse exploitative work, the labor market is forced to adjust.
Employers have to actually compete for workers by offering better wages, better conditions, and actual dignity.
Furthermore, when you remove the constant crushing anxiety of impending financial ruin, a citizen's cognitive bandwidth opens up.
Their ability to participate in political democracy, to educate themselves on policy, to vote thoughtfully, to organize in their community, radically increases.
Economic security is the oxygen that breathes actual life into political democracy.
Providing basic services is revolutionary. But the analysis pushes this even further.
It does.
Because even if you provide a solid floor of services, if the most powerful wealth-generating engines in the world, big tech, algorithmic data collection, artificial intelligence, remain entirely privately owned by a handful of billionaires, the inequality gap will just continue to accelerate into the stratosphere.
If they own the future infrastructure, they still hold the ultimate power.
Which leads to Ambedkar's most provocative solution for the modern age, democratizing capital itself.
This is where we move from providing a safety net to fundamentally restructuring ownership.
Okay.
Ambedkar strongly advocated for state-led ownership of critical infrastructure. During his time, looking at the agrarian economy of India, he argued that key wealth-generating industries, specifically agriculture, insurance, and banking, should be owned and managed by the state, not by private landlords or corporate monopolies.
He recognized that whoever controlled the banks and the land essentially controlled the fate of the nation.
Exactly.
But we aren't a purely agrarian society anymore. How do we translate that agricultural blueprint to the 21st century?
The modern equivalents of agrarian land are the digital networks, the energy grids, and the tech monopolies.
The underlying logic is identical then.
It is. If data and tech platforms are the new land, if they are the fertile soil from which modern, unprecedented wealth is harvested, then leaving them entirely in the hands of private corporations inevitably creates that digital feudalism we analyzed earlier.
So the argument here is for exploring robust public ownership models for technology and data.
The fundamental premise is that the vast wealth generated by digital infrastructure should benefit the society that actually produces it.
Hold on, let's look at the reality of how this data is generated. Right now, we are doing the labor.
We are.
Every single time we walk down the street with our smartphones tracking our location, every time we search for a medical symptom, every time we browse for a product, we are generating the raw behavioral data that fuels the algorithms.
We do the work of living, and the tech monopolies harvest that data, package it, and sell it to advertisers or use it to train AI.
It's generating billions in pure profit.
The data is a collective social product. Therefore, the argument goes, the wealth generated from that data should be a collective social asset.
How do we achieve that?
It could take the form of public data trusts, where civilian data is held in common, anonymized, and licensed to companies, with the profits returning directly to the Public Infrastructure Fund.
It could look like publicly owned municipal broadband networks, ensuring high-speed internet is a guaranteed utility rather than a telecom monopoly's profit center.
Or it could mean publicly funded open-source cloud computing infrastructure. Public ownership ensures that the primary directive of the technology is the enhancement of the public good, rather than the quarterly extraction of maximum profit for shareholders.
I have to pause here because this is where the modern brain heavily rebels against the concept.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
When people hear phrases like state ownership of technology or public ownership of data, massive alarm bells ring.
Of course they do.
They immediately envision dystopian government surveillance, a big brother state tracking every click. Or, at best, they picture terribly inefficient, crumbling, slow-moving government bureaucracy that ruins the innovation of the tech sector.
It is the single most important pushback to this entire framework, and it is precisely why Ambedkar spent so much intellectual energy refining his vision.
How does his framework of state socialism avoid just trading a ruthless corporate monopoly, like, big tech, for a creeping authoritarian government bureaucrat?
Because his framework was deeply fundamentally democratic. He was not advocating for authoritarian top-down control by an unchecked Politburo in a dark room.
Uh,
The entire goal is democratic oversight. You remove the profit motive from the essential infrastructure, so it serves the public, but you manage that infrastructure through institutions that are aggressively accountable to the public via a robust democratic political system.
so the mechanics of accountability are the key.
Yes. This is why he rejected orthodox Marxism. If the state owns the digital infrastructure, but the people cannot vote the leaders of the state out of office, you just have a new set of masters with even better surveillance tools.
Right.
Ambedkar's state socialism requires extreme transparency, independent judiciary oversight, and fierce constitutional protection of civil liberties.
So if you build public data utilities, they must be governed by independent boards elected by the public
Heavily audited by third parties.
and fully transparent in their algorithmic operations.
It is about dragging the engine of the economy out of the shadowy, unelected boardrooms of private equity in Silicon Valley and forcing it into the glaring light of democratic debate and public accountability.
It is about making the economy answer to the people it supposedly serves, rather than the people serving the economy.
Exactly.
Let's pull all these threads together. We started by looking at the extreme, jarring wealth inequality exposed by the pandemic.
We traced the historical mechanics of the caste system as an engine of economic exclusion.
Mapped those exact mechanics onto the algorithmic gig economy, analyzed the financialization of the housing market, and explored massive structural solutions like universal basic services and the public ownership of critical technology.
The overarching theme that binds all of this together is the concept of historical evolution.
Say more about that.
It is vital to frame these ideas not as some terrifying, radical, tear-it-all-down revolution that destroys society, but as the logical, necessary historical evolution toward true democracy.
Think about it in a historical timeline. Centuries ago, it was considered a natural, unshakable law of the universe that a single king, ordained by divine right, had the absolute power to rule over the political lives of millions of peasants.
It was unthinkable to challenge that.
But over centuries of struggle, humanity rejected that premise. We decided that no one person, by virtue of their birth, should hold a monopoly on political power.
We moved from kings to elected parliaments. We democratize political power.
And Ambedkar's profound argument is that we're simply stalling halfway through the project of freedom.
We must now apply that exact same evolutionary logic to our material lives. We must move from corporate monopolies and billionaire kings to the public, democratic ownership of our economic lives.
Economic democracy is not a radical deviation. It is simply the next necessary chapter in the history of human freedom.
Perfectly said.
And this is a direct appeal to you, listening right now. When you look at the extreme concentration of wealth in the world, when you feel the crushing weight of modern housing costs, when you see the exhaustion of gig workers hustling just to survive, none of this is natural.
It is not an inevitable law of physics like gravity.
These are deliberate systems built by humans. And because they are built by humans, they can be dismantled, redesigned, and restructured by humans, using frameworks exactly like the ones Dr. Ambedkar laid out over 80 years ago.
The intellectual tools for a fairer, more democratic world already exist in our history. The mechanisms are proven. We simply have to summon the collective courage to apply them to our future.
We want to leave you with a specific, final, provocative thought to chew on today. We've talked extensively about massive concepts: big tech monopolies, global housing markets, agricultural land.
But take a look around your own immediate daily life today.
Think about your routine. What is one piece of invisible infrastructure that you interact with every single day? Maybe it's a specific app you rely on to commute.
Or a digital service you are practically forced to use for your job.
Or a local utility that currently drains your wealth month after month. Imagine if that specific piece of infrastructure was publicly owned, entirely transparent, and operated purely for the common good rather than shareholder profit.
How would that single change fundamentally alter your personal freedom and your anxiety levels?
Think about that menu in your hands, and think about the money in your pockets. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.